Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Engage at the Bush Center, presented by Highland Capital Management. Highland Capital has supported our work here at the Bush Center since inception. We're so grateful for their commitment and to the folks from Highland Capital here today. Thank you so much, and thank you for being here. I know how blessed we all feel today to have a leader such as Gary Sinise with us here today, enduring impactful leadership that truly matters. Notably through his RISE program, Restoring Independence and Supporting Empowerment, where very simply, leaders who wear the scars of battle can focus on their tomorrow. A special shout out to the most recent recipient of this impact, injured in Afghanistan 2011, Captain Jake Murphy and his wife. Lisa now embrace the next chapter of their lives in the smart home adapted to their needs, provided by Gary Sinise Foundation. We're honored to have you both here today. Thank you. But ladies and gentlemen, leadership is why we are here. And as you saw in the video here at the Bush Institute, we're honored to work on developing leaders, advancing policy, and taking action to address today's most pressing challenges across a number of issues based on the values of President and Mrs. Bush. Now, our work at the Military Service Initiative is focused on fostering successful transitions from military to civilian life for our post-9/11 warriors and their families. Every transition is unique, but we think there are three keys to success: optimizing health and well-being, and leveraging meaningful education and employment opportunities. And how do we do that? Our health and well-being program is focused on addressing the invisible wounds of war and connecting those in need to care through our Warrior Wellness Alliance. We're in the second year now of our Veteran Leadership Program, a one-of-a-kind, I think, which is aimed at individuals serving our nation's veterans who want to broaden their skill set and impact. Our economic opportunity work highlights that crucial transition issue of not just the next job, but the next career, and the right steps to take to get there through our Veteran Employment Transition Roadmap. But finally, our Team 43 family, our sports program, highlights the service, sacrifice, and continued leadership of our most severely wounded warriors and their families, and the role that the community of sport can play in a successful transition. But in the end, along with success and transition, our work here at the Bush Institute, inspired by President and Mrs. Bush, is about continued leadership. And through our work, and many of you know, the vast majority of our warrior families transition so successfully and embrace their next leadership opportunity. By helping veterans lead in their communities, we, of course, as a nation, benefit. One of these leaders, one of our Team 43 family members, athlete, is Bobby Dove. He was featured in President Bush's book, Portraits of Courage. And that's him right there next to John Falkenberry. He's on the left. In 2008, Bobby joined the U.S. Army, deploying to Afghanistan as a Green Beret medic. And I'd like to share with you the words of President Bush, who told Bobby's story in Portraits of Courage. In 2012, Staff Sergeant Dove was on a combat reconnaissance patrol north of Kandahar when his dirt bike hit an IED. The explosion knocked Bobby out, blowing off his right hand and right leg and breaking his pelvis. When Bobby came to, he was the only medic on the scene. His medical training kicked in. He tried with his left hand to treat himself. His teammate Cliff Beard rushed to his side. Bobby told Cliff exactly how to stabilize him, starting with the order, tourniquet, tourniquet, tourniquet. Cliff followed Bobby's every word, every instruction, and it worked. It saved his life. And in 2013, Bobby played in our Warrior Open golf tournament. It's here where we're able to show just how playing the game of golf can be challenging in different ways. Many prosthetics have active microchips in them, helping with balance and the ability to react to undulating terrain. Well, Bobby's failed, and in swinging every single time, he fell down. Now, you don't hear this often, but his now wife, Emmy, went to get his backup leg, which didn't hold its charge. So in true military fashion, he and warrior Ken Dwyer were able to fix it with spare arm parts and that universal tool known as duct tape. And Bobby finished about an hour and a half late, but he finished. And what I'm going to show you here is remarkable. To say Bobby still plays some golf would not do it any justice. And for those of you amongst us who have that love-hate relationship with the game of golf, just take a look at his swing today. Straight and true. To say that Bobby makes the most of his life would also be an epic understatement. Today he runs Hooligan Charters, for those of you interested, a fishing guide business out of Destin, Florida. Now, just as an aside, does anyone think it's interesting that he ended up as a captain of a fishing boat? Maybe we have more of a connection with Forrest Gump than just Lieutenant Dan, but we'll see. Anyway. Bobby and his wife, Emmy, are proud parents of son Wyatt and daughter Eva. He hunts, including in some very rugged terrain. And he also has a very direct, very personal connection to Gary Sinise and the work of the Gary Sinise Foundation. Now, ladies and gentlemen, to introduce Gary, let's give a Texas welcome to an American hero, Bobby Dove.
Thank you, and good afternoon. It is such an honor to be here today. I appreciate that little golf video. It took a lot of hard work. I'm retired Staff Sergeant Bobby Dove. I was a Green Beret medic in the 7th Special Forces Group in the Army, stationed out of Eglin Air Force Base, Florida. I'm so pleased to be given the opportunity to share with you a portion of my personal story before introducing two of my favorite people who have taken it upon themselves to improve the lives of countless veterans throughout this great nation, and to give you the testament of the tremendous impact they have had on my life. On June 9th, 2012, during my first deployment to Afghanistan, I was driving a dirt bike as part of a small mobile element, and we had completed a short mission and were RTB, or returned to base, at that time. As we entered a low ground, as we have done so many times before, I maneuvered from the back around to take the next front position in high ground and overwatch. About halfway down the hill, my front tire triggered a pressure plate IED. As a result of the blast, in a single instant, I had suffered the loss of my dominant leg and hand, shattered pelvis, broken remaining hand, shrapnel, numerous soft tissue injuries, and of course a traumatic brain injury, or TBI. Little knowing to myself at the time, at that very same instant, my current ability and reality of being a limitless special operator and my entire purpose in life was also taken from me. I was knocked out for about a minute and came to as I felt my body take a deep breath. Even after sustaining the full effects of the blast, my brain immediately kicked into medic mode and I began to self-treat before two teammates arrived, applied tourniquets to what was left of my limbs, and saved my life right there on the ground. I was flown by helicopter to Kandahar and was put into an induced coma before my first emergency surgery. Another set of airlifts later, to other parts of Afghanistan and Germany, I awoke some 9 days later with my family and now wife Emmy at my side in the ICU at Walter Reed in Bethesda, Maryland. Thinking back to that day that I awoke in the ICU, that very first day, I was struck with a profound realization that I had a choice to make. I could allow these events and injuries to define me while feeling sorry for myself and pleading with God why I had not died on the battlefield, or I could choose to retain my grit, warrior never quit mentality, and define them for myself. While at Walter Reed, a group of us were visited by then Deputy Commander of 7th Group, Colonel Miguel Howe. Out of the many visitors we had, he had struck me as one of the most sincere. His genuine concern for his men was obvious from that day and has never faltered. Only a few days after receiving my first prosthetics, I found myself enjoying a sport I grew up loving and will always love, the love-hate of golf. It took about 3 hours, but I completed 4 holes at a course in Virginia with my wife and her family. I would spend 7 months at Walter Reed undergoing nearly 40 surgeries, multiple prosthetics fits, and months of rehab. Afterward, I returned to duty, still retaining my position as a senior medical sergeant on my team, and even participating on a portion of a non-combat rotation before transitioning off my team and becoming the liaison for other service members returning to the unit. While back on active duty, I was informed about the Warrior Open, a golf tournament held by the George W. Bush Presidential Center, or Mr. 43, as some of us like to call him. Of course, a lover of golf myself, I was immediately interested, applied, was accepted, and exhausted everything in myself in preparation. I took it as just one of another of life's great challenges and set the goal of being a true competitor. Coincidentally, at the same time, Colonel Howe had retired from the Army and had taken on the position as director of the MSI, or Military Service Initiative, here at the Bush Center. My friendship with Colonel Howe continued to grow as I participated in more of the Bush Institute MSI events, and he, through a unique series of events, led me to connect with another now friend of mine, Gary Sinise, through the Gary Sinise Foundation. Since medically retiring in 2014, after 6 years of military service, I had married the love of my life. We now have 2 beautiful children. I've worked with and for multiple veteran nonprofit organizations, have started and continue to run my own business, and done speaking engagements all over the country. Collectively, these now have restored purpose in my life that was once taken from me. This past December, by the grace of God and good old Mr. Sinise, our family became one of over 50 to receive a fully customized smart home through the Gary Sinise Foundation's RISE program. This home was custom built around all of my individual and specific needs, not only wheelchair accessible, but having a kitchen I can cook in, a shower I can use safely, and countertops and shelves measured specifically for me. It has made everyday life doable and full of purpose once again. To say that this house has been life-changing is truly an understatement. I have had the pleasure of meeting and talking with Mr. Sinise on several occasions, and he is one of the nicest and most down-to-earth people on this planet. His and his team's undaunted dedication to our service members is an example we all need to take note of and do our best to follow. The Bush Institute and Gary Sinise Foundation are 2 organizations who are not only forging greatness all over the country, but breaking free from the pack and setting a whole new standard in a realm all of their own. They have not only been at the forefront of restoring my purpose in life, but for countless others as well. Our enemies may take our abilities, our limbs, and even our loved ones, but for those of us remaining, they will never have the power to take from us our ability to choose what we do next. I ask you all, I beg you, choose to fight with us. With that, I would like to introduce 2 of my best friends, the April and J. Graham Fellow, retired Colonel Miguel Howe, and you may know him as Lieutenant Dan, but there are many of us who simply call him Gary, Mr. Gary Sinise.
Wow. Wow. You know, the term hero is thrown around a lot in a lot of different contexts. But today truly, we walk amongst heroes. Heroes like Bobby and Emmy Dove, Jake and Lisa Murphy, men and women who are heroes because they elected to lead a life of purpose in choice, and who continue to choose to triumph over adversity and lead a life of meaning. How about another round of applause? Now, I'm probably going to embarrass him by starting out this way, but today we're blessed to spend the afternoon with someone who has come to be known as really a hero to our heroes, Mr. Gary Sinise. So, Gary, I just want to start out by jumping into, kind of what brings you here this afternoon. You've already been a very popular, a very accomplished and acclaimed entertainer and citizen. But today you're here with us to talk a little bit about your new passion project, Grateful American, a journey from self to service. Can we start out by, why did you decide to write this book?
Oh, why not? I had, over the years, I've just been able to do some pretty interesting things and meet extraordinary, inspirational people. And at one point, having been to so many places around the world where our troops are working and living and visiting them in various places, meeting extraordinary folks, I'd accumulated all these stories, all these moments, all these events, all these relationships that have been meaningful, all these photographs, all this content. And at one point I thought, well, maybe I would just kind of document some of that and put some of that down. Maybe in some sort of picture book or something like that. And then I started thinking of the broader story of how did I kind of get to all that? What preceded all the service work and the military veterans and first responder initiatives that I'm involved in, and so I started to think, well, let's look at it. And I was encouraged by my agent to think about it and consider it. Have a manager I've been with for many years. They encouraged me to kind of look at it and take a look at it. So we came up with an outline of what I thought I wanted to address and how I wanted to address it, and then we pitched it to some publishers, and Thomas Nelson really was very excited to get involved with the project. So then I sat down, had a wonderful guy who was helping me put it all together, a guy named Marcus Brotherton. And because I'm out there running around all over the place, it'd be very difficult to sit down and write a book for 8 months or 10 months. So it was a good process where I was able to kind of talk and record a lot of things that were on my mind and in my brain, and things that I had done and all of that, and things I wanted to address in the book, and then it was all laid out and I could see it and then address it. And it took about 14 months. Oh. And I didn't know what the book was going to be called when I started out. But as I started to rewrite it and reread it and go over it and go through it, these recurring themes just kept popping out of gratitude, appreciation, inspiration, selfless stuff that I was talking about in the people that I'd met, and then this gratitude just kept coming to me, and I am grateful for so many things. I've been through a lot of different things, and like anybody, we've got our crosses to bear and our challenges, but I'm grateful to be an American. I'm grateful to live in this country, and I'm most grateful for the men and women who provide our freedom for us and allow us to live this way. So I wanted to talk about that in the book.
So Gary, it's an incredible story. It really is an incredible journey. So can we start at that beginning? Your own words refer to your ragtag start in your youth in Chicago suburbs. So is that the period that you refer to when you talk about self and your journey from self to service?
There's a chapter in my book called Turning Point. And everything leading up to that point is kind of, I'm focused on sort of just my singular self-interest of becoming an actor, learning the craft, building a theater company, trying to break into the movie business, be successful at that, make a living at it, all of that. And then September 11th rolls around, and that's a turning point. And so there's the pre-September 11th part of the book and the post-September 11th part of the book. And everything up to September 11th, there were all these seeds that were being planted along the way for what would become the service part of my life. So the book is called Grateful American, A Journey from Self to Service. And it's not selfishness. That's not what I'm talking about when I talk about self. I talk about just the small, singular focus on what I was personally interested in accomplishing for myself at the time, which was to become an actor and to become successful at that and to make a living at it and all of that. Along the way, there were all kinds of seeds that were planted along the way in this self part of the journey. There's the veterans in my own family. My grandfather served in the Army in World War I. He drove an ambulance in France during the Battle of the Argonne Forest, one of the deadliest battles our country's ever faced. Over 26,000 were killed during this particular battle in World War I. And he was driving the wounded back and forth from the battlefront. Very dangerous job. He had 3 sons. 3 sons. And my 2 uncles. The elder of the 2 was a navigator on a B-17 bomber over Europe. He served 30 missions, survived 30 missions over Europe. The middle brother, my Uncle Jerry, was in the Navy. He was on a landing ship tank during the battles of Okinawa and Iwo Jima and part of the occupation of Japan. Then my father, who was the youngest of the 3, he served in the Navy in the early 50s during the Korean War. And so there's my side of the family there with the veterans. And then I met the woman who would become my wife. I met her in 1976. She introduced me to her brothers. 2 served in Vietnam, 1 a combat helicopter, assault helicopter pilot, 800 combat hours over Vietnam. Then the oldest brother, who was a West Point graduate, 2 tours in Vietnam, once as lieutenant, a platoon leader, then went back as a company commander, a captain, then taught at West Point as a major, then went to teach at Fort Leavenworth as a lieutenant colonel. And he passed away in 1983. But I met him in '76, and I knew him for that period of time, that 7-year period. He made a gigantic impression on me as a leader, as a military officer, as a Vietnam veteran, what it was like to come home from Vietnam. My wife's sister served in the Army. She married a Vietnam veteran, a combat medic, 22 years in the Army. They had a son. He served in the Army for 13 years, 2 deployments to Afghanistan in the infantry. So a lot of veterans in my family, and I learned quite a bit from the Vietnam veteran side of my family, and they kind of opened my eyes in the 70s and early 80s and made me think a lot about what I was doing in school when they were fighting in the jungle. And I graduated, there's a funny story in my book where, I'm such a goofball in high school that I didn't have enough credits to graduate with my class. My class was 1973. I had to go back for an extra semester, so I graduated class of 1973 and a half. So, man. So Matt said I could go to both reunions for 73 and 74. I guess I never thought about that. But I went back to high school. I was kind of a screw up, and the combat operations in Vietnam ended in 1973. And I met my wife, my girlfriend, then became my wife, in 1976, and she introduced me to her Vietnam veteran family members, and they started talking to me, and I started learning and thinking, holy cow, you know. I was oblivious to what was going on in Vietnam when I was in high school. The Vietnam War was raging all through my high school years. I remember going to some high school protests, you know, to protest the war, 1969, 70. But I was only going because if you said you were at the protest, they'd give you a pass and you'd get out of class. So I got out of class and I just went. And, you know, when I started to get to know these Vietnam veterans in my family, I just started I started to have this terrible sense of guilt and shame. Bad feeling that I had been so unaware. And so back in the early 80s, I started supporting Vietnam veterans in various ways.
And that really kind of came to fruition, right, Gary, in the play Tracers? Because I think if you haven't read the book, you will. They're on sale outside. But I was struck by, as you describe the impact and the influence of your family members, and particularly Vietnam veterans. And yet, one of those critical pieces of your inflection point was Barbara Patterson in that key moment that I heard you describe earlier, and that puts you on this trajectory into the arts. And so maybe if you could talk a little bit about that, but wasn't it through the arts and through Steppenwolf that you were able to finally come to the play Tracers and kind of bring to bear these lessons learned about our military and our Vietnam generation of warriors?
Yeah, so I'll backtrack just slightly. And stumbling into acting in high school, which I describe in the book, it's kind of a very emotional chapter for me to write, because, and the chapter is called Baptism. And I was truly baptized into this theater world as a young kid. I was really a struggling student. When I say I was a goofball, I was a goofball, and I was near being asked to leave. You know, you may leave high school now. We don't want you here now anymore. Find another school. And I was near that moment. And music was always very kind of something that got me through, and I was playing in a band with some kids in high school. I was probably skipping class, and I was standing in a hallway in the high school, and this little lady came powering down the hallway, and she turned to us, and she said, "I'm directing West Side Story, and you look perfect for the gang members. Please come and audition for the play." And then she kind of fluttered off down the hall, and I ended up going to the audition after school, and I stumbled into the audition. I walked, pretty girls are going in there, and so in I go. And I didn't know what an audition was, or I didn't know how to, read or anything. I could barely do anything. So they gave me a script, and I got up there, and I just started bobbling through it like a nincompoop. But I was getting laughs, and so I got a few laughs, and you get a couple, you keep going, right? So I tried to keep getting a few more, and I got a few more, and I looked up, and she was laughing too. The teacher was laughing. So next thing I know, the next day, I go and have anybody been in a play here before? So you go and you look for the cast list, the next day, and you see if your name's on the list. And there my name was on the list. And I got a part, one of the sharks. You know West Side Story, right? It's the American gang and the Puerto Rican gang, and the Puerto Ricans are the sharks, and the American gang is the Jets, and I got the part of Peppy the Shark. So I was Peppy, and he had a couple of lines, and I fell in love with theater, and it changed the whole purpose of life for me at that time. I was really nearly going to be kicked out of school, and now all I wanted to do was be in high school plays. I wanted to take all the theater classes, and I wanted to be a part of that. Changed my life. I got out of school. I started a theater company as soon as I got out of school. And I write about the early Steppenwolf theater days in the book. And then eventually, after I met my wife, and she introduced me to her Vietnam family members, I got so focused on Vietnam and wanting to try to do something for our Vietnam veterans that I ended up directing this play that Miguel mentioned called Tracers. It was written by a group of Vietnam veterans who just got together and started kind of acting out their own personal stories in Vietnam. And they would get together every day for 6 months and kind of they created this play that they were performing on stage. And I wanted to do something to focus on the experience of our Vietnam veterans in the theater. So I got the rights to that play and directed it. And it turned into just a massively important moment that kind of bonded me together with local Vietnam veterans groups in Chicago. In the early 80s, I started supporting them in various ways. And it really was life-changing and set the stage for what would come in the 90s.
Well, Gary, I've never been in a play, but that's clearly the power of drama in film, is that I probably look more like a Pepe and you more like a Jet. So that really, so Barbara Patterson and acting become a catalyst to Steppenwolf, and successive plays like Tracers then take you to Broadway, and then you find yourself in film, and your career really gets going. In 1994, you have an opportunity to play this Lieutenant Dan Taylor character in a film some of you may have heard of, Forrest Gump. But you really wanted to do, everyone can hear the passion and the authenticity in your voice and in your deeds over the past 25 years. What did this part mean, and how did you prepare for it?
Well, when the opportunity came along to audition for Forrest Gump, I was tuned up because of the Vietnam veterans in my family, and because of the work I'd done in Chicago with Vietnam veterans groups in the 80s. All of a sudden, the 90s roll along. My wife and I had moved to Los Angeles. I was trying to get my film career going. I actually was, I tell a story in the book about being invited to actually come and take a movie deal out in Hollywood. A directing deal. The head of Columbia Pictures saw some of the plays that I had directed, and they were very successful plays. They did really well, and they offered me a movie deal. So I was given a 2-year deal to come out and look for something to direct in Hollywood. So I moved to California, and I directed a movie called Miles from Home, a small movie with Richard Gere and some other folks in it. Then I did The Grapes of Wrath on Broadway. And then I went back to California and started auditioning again, did a couple of movies, and along comes an audition after a couple of films for Forrest Gump to play Lieutenant Dan. And when I read it, the opportunity is right here to play a Vietnam veteran. And I was just like, this is my part. I've got to do this. So I very much wanted to audition for it. I got the audition. I remember I went in, auditioned one time. Usually you'll audition over, 2 or 3 times. They'll call you back, try it again, We're narrowing down. Now we got 3 guys, let's bring them all back, But I auditioned once and didn't get called back. But my agents kept telling me, well, they haven't cast it yet. You might still be in the running and everything. And I was a little worried, you can't, the thing you'd learn as an actor, and you got to learn it through experience, is you can't hang your hat on one part and just sit there and wait for it, because when you do that, it won't come, So I had auditioned for enough things and not gotten the part enough times that I said, well, I've got to move on beyond Lieutenant Dan. I really want it, but it's out of my hands. There's nothing I can do about it. It's totally up to the producers and the director. So I'm going to audition for some other things. So I went out and auditioned for a movie called Little Buddha. Any Little Buddha fans in here today? No, there aren't. Not a single Little Buddha fan in here.
Well, if you could be Pepe, you could have been.
Well, Little Buddha was being directed by Bernardo Bertolucci, you know, very highly regarded Italian director. And it got down to me and one other actor, Chris Isaak. You know Chris Isaak, the singer? So Chris wanted to get in the movie business, so he auditions for Little Buddha, and I auditioned for Little Buddha. It's two guys, it's down to two guys. And at the same time I auditioned for Little Buddha and screen tested for that, I screen tested for another remake of Wyatt Earp. Kevin Costner. Anyone see that one? No? There's one person who saw that movie. Oh, two. Okay, three. All right, well. The thing I'm getting at is I got really close to both those movies. And had I gotten Little Buddha or Wyatt Earp, I may not have been available for what came just a few days after I was rejected from Little Buddha and Wyatt Earp, which was, I got the call that I got the part as Lieutenant Dan. And so thankfully, I didn't get Little Buddha. Chris did, though. Chris got Little Buddha, so he was in Little Buddha. And so I got the part of Lieutenant Dan, and it was life-changing in so many ways. Not just for the career, which I hadn't done that many movies prior to that. I made a movie of Mice and Men. I did a movie called A Midnight Clear, and another movie called Jack the Bear. I did a mini-series called The Stand, Stephen King. So Stephen King's The Stand came out in May of 1993, and Forrest Gump came out in May of 1994, and Forrest Gump came out in July of 1994. The Stand was like 60 million people watched The Stand. It was the biggest miniseries of the year, and then 2 months later, Forrest Gump came out, and it was the biggest movie of the year. So that can do a lot for your career. It changed everything at that time.
So, Gary, we've got a clip.
Oh,
from
you've got
the
clip.
film.
No shrimp.
Where the hell's this god of yours?
It's funny Lieutenant Dan said that, because right then, God showed up.
You'll never see
Now me, I was scared, but Lieutenant Dan, he was mad.
Come on! You call this a storm? Oh, you son of a bitch! Oh! It's time for a showdown! You and me! I'm right here! Come and get me! You'll never sink this boat!
So Gary, clearly at that point in the movie, Lieutenant Dan is pretty angry. You know, Bobby talked about how he had to refine his lost sense of purpose when he became wounded. What kind of reaction did you get from the veterans to your depiction, this authentic depiction of a wounded warrior?
At the beginning of my book, I talk about a moment that really was galvanizing in terms of my relationship with our wounded, and it was when about 3 weeks after the movie opened, the Disabled American Veterans Organization contacted me and invited me to come to their national convention in Chicago. And they wanted to present me with an award for playing Lieutenant Dan. And this is an organization that has it's upwards of 2 million wounded veterans that are part of the DAV. And I didn't know much about the DAV at that time. And they invited me to come to the national convention. So I went, and I remember standing backstage, and it was kind of like in the kitchen, you know. They brought me back down through the kitchen, and I'm standing behind the kitchen doors, and I heard that scene. It was playing on the video screens, and it was screaming, and it's a big ballroom with people out there, and they're watching the clips from the movie, and I was standing back there listening to it. And then they introduced me, and I walked out on stage, and I walked up this wheelchair ramp and out into the middle of the stage, and there were 2,500 wounded veterans in the audience. And it was just, it was overwhelming and emotional, and you know, those that could stand up out of their wheelchairs were giving me a standing ovation, and I was just caught off guard with emotion. And from that point on, I stayed actively involved with the DAV, and so much of that and the work that I'd done with Vietnam veterans in the 80s and the becoming involved with our wounded in the 90s, those were seeds that were planted for what would take root in the turning point chapter of the book.
Now, for those of you who may have been under a rock for the past 25 years, spoiler alert, there is a happy ending for Lieutenant Dan.
Forrest? I never thanked you for saving my life.
He never actually said so, but I think he made his peace with God.
So Gary, can you talk about the meaning of Lieutenant Dan's redemption and how that's impacted you and your life's mission?
You know what, we were talking earlier about this particular story of a wounded veteran. So this is 1994 when the movie came out, and if you think back, those of you that are old enough to think back to this time, movies about the Vietnam experience and the Vietnam veterans started to be made by Hollywood around 1978. So you had Platoon, and you had The Deer Hunter, and you had Coming Home, you had Apocalypse Now, Casualties of War. There were a lot of films that were made about the Vietnam veteran experience. But if you look at all of those films, at the end of the film, you always had a question as to whether the Vietnam veteran was going to be all right, whether he was going to be able to overcome what had happened to them. And along comes Forrest Gump in 1994, and what happens to Lieutenant Dan at the end of this story? How many people saw Forrest Gump in here? I mean, anyone who didn't see Forrest Gump? Everybody saw Forrest Gump? Okay, so good. I'm talking. Great. So you remember what happens to Forrest? What happens at the end of the story of Lieutenant Dan is he shows up, and he's standing up on legs. He's a successful businessman. Now he's married and moving on with his relationships. He's not sequestered by himself in isolation and alcohol abuse anymore. He's moving on. He's successful. We hadn't seen the story of a Vietnam veteran as someone who could push forward in life until Forrest Gump came along. So it was a very hopeful and positive ending of the story of a Vietnam veteran. That's one of the reasons why the DAV asked me to come and be a part of their national convention. They hadn't seen that either. And so it was a very, it was a positive portrayal of a catastrophically injured veteran as someone who could put the war experience, put it behind them, move on, and be okay. And when I started visiting our hospitals, post-September 11th and deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan, I would walk into the hospital rooms and 100% of the time, the veterans that I was visiting, the wounded service members that I was visiting, they would want to talk about that character. And for a long time, they didn't know what my real name was. They would just recognize, Lieutenant Dan's here, hey. How'd they do those legs? That kind of thing. And, I'd explain it. I'd talk about the movie. I remember being very apprehensive about my first visits to the hospital, and I'd talk about that. What am I going to see? Who am I going to meet? What kind of injuries am I going to have to talk to people about and stuff? And 9 times out of 10, or almost 100% of the time, the story of Lieutenant Dan would just break the ice. Lieutenant Dan walked in the room, and they wanted to talk about the movie. They wanted to hear how the movie was made. They wanted to hear about, the story of hope that Lieutenant Dan has, because that's the story that we want for every single veteran coming home from war, isn't it? We want them to be okay, and we want them to move on. And we've got 2 real-life Lieutenant Dans right here who are doing just that. They're moving on with their life. They're successful. They've got jobs. They're pushing on. Their families are okay. And they got 2 really nice houses.
So hold that thought, Gary. We're going to get there. I do want to give a shout out. Now, you see 350 people here in the auditorium who have all watched Forrest Gump. And just in case anybody wasn't fully truthful, all you got to do is turn on TBS Sunday afternoons. It's on every Sunday.
It's on every week, yeah.
But there is an overflow room with about 100 other guests, Gary. They do have a cash bar, so don't feel too bad for them over there. But we gave them the opportunity as members of this audience here in the auditorium as well to ask questions. And so Bill, and I'm probably going to screw up this last name here, but Bill Fladvid wants to know, in your opinion, what do you think this current generation needs to learn about this great country and what it really means to be an American?
Well, unfortunately, civics isn't really being widely taught in our schools, I don't think. I think there are some schools that probably focus on civics, but we don't really teach that as much. We don't teach, I don't think, the importance of freedom. Now, I'm not saying that broadly. I don't make big blanket statements. There are some great teachers, I think, that are focused on making sure that our students understand where our freedom comes from and who provides it for us. But I would wish that more of that would be developed in our schools so that people would understand the cost of freedom, what it takes to protect it, and why it's important to take care of the people that provide it for us. When you go around the world and you see societies and countries that don't really understand what freedom is, you value your freedom that much more, and that makes you value your freedom providers that much more. I tell a story sometimes. You know, I've been to the DMZ up between North and South Korea 3 or 4 times, and it's this strange. Anyone been to the DMZ before? So you know it's a very strange place when you go up to the DMZ, because you're standing here and there's, I mean, the border line is as big as this red thing here, you know, and you can stand like right here, and I can reach out and touch a North Korean guard who's staring me right in the face. And the South Koreans back here, they've been free all those years. They understand and value their freedom. They know what it takes to protect it. But this poor guy right here, he's been a slave for all his life, and he has no concept of what being able to speak freely is, being able to live free, say what he wants. They don't know anything about freedom. And so when you go to places like that, you know, and you've been to Iraq and Afghanistan, places that have lived under warlords or dictatorships, or it just makes you value your freedom that much more. And one of the programs that we have at the Gary Sinise Foundation, I'll wrap up this thought, is called Soaring Valor. And it's a program American Airlines supports my foundation so much. And they will provide me opportunities to bring World War II veterans down to the National World War II Museum in New Orleans, which is this magnificent museum dedicated to the stories and the history of World War II, a time where freedom and tyranny, there was never a thinner line between freedom and tyranny than what happened at that moment. I mean, just think, there were 2 outcomes, right? Freedom wins or freedom loses. I mean, thankfully, thank God for our World War II veterans that freedom won. But we have this great opportunity to take not only our World War II veterans down to the National World War II Museum, but we pair them up with high school students. So each one of these high school students, through funding from the Gary Sinise Foundation, transportation provided by American Airlines, and our partner at the National World War II Museum, these high school students get to travel with a travel buddy who's 95 years old. And each one of these 16, 17-year-old students gets to spend 3 days with someone who saved the world for all of us. That kind of education is unparalleled. Those students leave that with a new understanding of the cost of freedom and what it takes to provide it. I wish every student in America could go to the National World War II Museum. We're going to try to get as many down there as possible.
Somebody was about to start some applause, so let's go ahead and join. Now, I know, Gary, you're too humble and probably be embarrassed for me to say this, but many refer to you as the Bob Hope of the 9/11 generation. And recently, I understand you've hit the incredible milestone of your 100th USO visit. Can you talk about those experiences a little bit? Oh, look, there you are.
Hey, look at that stud up there. After the attacks of September 11th, having been involved with Vietnam veterans in the 80s and working with our wounded in the 90s, you know, I felt called. This was such a terrible thing to happen to our country. And I felt like many of us, I felt afraid. I felt confused. I mean, how many of us just felt like, what is going on? And are there going to be more attacks? And what kind of world are we in? There were those that just started raising their hands and signing up to go into the military to protect us against the possibility of that happening again, and to address, you know, the terrorist threat that we face. And I wanted to be a part of supporting them, having Vietnam veterans in my family, knowing what it was like for our Vietnam veterans to come home to a divided nation that was not supportive of what they were doing. The thought of that happening to our current generation of warriors responding to this terrible attack on our country, that the thought of them coming home to a nation that didn't appreciate them, that was very troubling to me. So I started raising my hand in all these different ways. And, you know, the first thing, you know, an actor can do is call the USO up. So I started calling the USO. And it's funny, in the book, I talk about this. I called the USO and left a message and said, "Hi, I'm Gary Sinise. I really want to go visit the troops, show my support. Can you call me back?" And then I didn't get a call back.
Gary who?
No call back. So I called him again. It was Gary Sinise. I'd really like to go on a trip. I want to support the troops, and, you know, no call back. So finally I thought, maybe "Hi, this is Gary Sinise. I'm the guy that played Lieutenant Dan. Will you call me back?" And they called me back. So they didn't know who Gary Sinise was, but they knew who Lieutenant Dan was. So they called me back, and Lieutenant Dan went on a trip. And I went on my first USO tour over to Iraq in June of 2003. It was about 2 months after the statue got pulled down. Remember? Soldiers tied that chain around it and put it on a tank, and the tank just yanked the statue down. That was in April of '03, and I went over in June of '03 on a big, giant USO tour that Kid Rock was on. Leanne Womack was on that trip. Paul Rodriguez, the comedian. Robert De Niro was there. Rebecca and Ramon Stamos, and all these people. Cheerleaders, Dallas Cowboy cheerleader, by the way. They were football players, they were basketball players. I mean, it was a giant tour. Northwest Airlines gave us a 747, and we put 180 people on the tour, and we went over. And it was my first tour in June of '03, and then I just started raising my hand over and over and going out and trying to provide support wherever I could. And I had some musicians I played with, so I talked the USO into letting me take them on a trip.
How does that happen, Gary? How do you go from actor to musician? Your handshakes weren't enough, huh?
No, because, you know, on the first trip, I was on the trip with Kid Rock, and he got up there and, you know, rocked it out, and Leanne Womack was singing, and then I would walk out and say, "Hi, I'm Lieutenant Dan." And I walk off. You know? And I felt like I wasn't really contributing to the U.S. And I did that. I did a lot of handshake tours and taking pictures and all that. But I played music. I played music from the time I was in 4th grade through high school into my early 20s. And I had some people I played with for free, or, you know, for free and for fun. And I just started telling the USO I could take a band. I could put a band together, and, you know. So finally, you know, I bugged them enough, and I'd done 6 or 7 of these handshake tours all around the world. I went to Iraq twice that year, and Italy and Germany and different places. And they finally said, okay. They said, and you know what's weird is they didn't ask, well, can we hear a CD? Actor with a band, I'm not sure if that's going to work. But they didn't. They didn't ask for a CD. I guess they just trusted me. So they set up a tour. And my first tour was February of 2004. And does anyone know where Diego Garcia is?
Nowhere.
Yeah, Bruce, I know you went there. They sent you there because they wanted to get you out of town as far as they could. Well, that's what they did with us. Diego Garcia is down, way down in the middle of the Indian Ocean. It's about as far as you could get away. It's like 24 hours to get there. And that was our first concert for the Lieutenant Dan Band. They figured nobody'd hear about it if it was bad or something. But, you know, they got good reports. We put on a good show. It was pretty rough. It was pretty, you know, because I called up the guys and I said, hey, we're going on tour. Let's learn some songs, you know. What should we play? You know? Purple Haze. Yeah, let's do it. You know, so we learned some songs. We put on a show, and it wasn't half bad. It wasn't half good either. But when I got back, I loved it. We went to Diego Garcia. We went to Singapore too, and we went to Korea, and did 3 shows in Korea too. And that was the first time I went up to the DMZ in February '04. And then I came back and I said, where can I go in the States? Send me someplace. So we set up a domestic tour. That was '04, boom, 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 boom. I think now we're over 450 concerts for the troops since 2004. Wow. Yeah.
Now, Gary, I do have 2 final questions for you, but before I do, since we gave Bill a question in the overflow room, we do have a question from Tony here in the auditorium. Tony's a big fan of your work, and he's got a question for you about Apollo 13. Did you ever get the measles?
Where is Tony? Tony, show yourself. Oh, there's Tony.
There he is.
Did Gary ever get the measles, or did the character? The character never got the measles. No. Do you know what he's talking about? Do you remember Apollo 13? Who saw Apollo 13 in here? So pretty much everybody? Anyone not see Apollo 13? That was a good period for me right in there in the 90s. I got to be in some good movies. No, the character, T.K. Mattingly, no. Gary, I think Gary did have that one. Apollo 13 was so much fun to make. It was, I remember, Forrest Gump came out in 1994, and right before it came out, Ron Howard cast me in his next film, which was Apollo 13, and then Ron came to see the premiere of Forrest Gump, and he had just cast me in the movie, and I remember he came up to me after seeing Forrest Gump, and he goes, I'm glad I cast you. He liked Forrest Gump, so he was happy. We got to do some cool things in that. We went to space camp in Huntsville, Alabama. I got to go down to Florida and see one of the shuttle launches. We went to Houston and spent a bunch of time at Johnson Space Center. We went up on the KC-135 training airplane, which is, you know, nicknamed the Vomit Comet, you know, for...
You're called One Bag? Is that...
Yeah, there's a funny picture in my book. So a bunch of us went up there, Tom Hanks and me and Bill Paxton, Kevin Bacon, and we had flight suits, and every flight suit has, you know, the zippers right here, and you can see the picture in the book. They gave us little plastic bags, and we've all got 2 plastic bags in our flight suit. You know what the plastic bags are for, right? So, and then there's one of us who returns from space with only 1 plastic bag. I got a little sick. So what they do is you do these parabolas, these motions like this. The airplane will climb. It's a KC-135 tanker that is basically, it's got seats in the back, but the whole middle of it is padded, and it's got big lights on the side, and you can float around inside the plane when it drops. And so it will climb like this, like a roller coaster when you're on a roller coaster, and then it falls to the earth like that. For 25 seconds, the airplane is heading straight to the earth. And during that 25 seconds, everything inside the plane floats around. And so it simulates, you get this weightlessness. And so we got to do that. And we were supposed to do it 40 times. 40 times, up and down, up and down. And we get it to the 40th time, and Ron Howard says, hey, can we do 10 more? So they start going 41, and then 42, and Gary had to sit down and strap in for the rest of the trip. Yeah. And you know what was funny? They have a doctor on the plane. And you'd think that NASA would have some pretty sophisticated high-tech equipment to take care of people that get sick on the airplane, right? He pulls out one of those battery-operated fans. I'm strapped in, and he's standing here like this. Just holding the fan on my face. And I'm turning green, and sweat's pouring down. And we're doing another one. Terrible. I write about that stuff in the book. It's pretty funny. I've had some wonderful opportunities, no question.
We may have mentioned the book is for sale outside. So Gary, in 2011, I mean, CSI New York is really cranking along. I heard a woo out there. Who are Mac Taylor fans?
CSI New York fans. Yeah.
And so this is really your first steady gig, you know, in a long time. Well, you know, you've had a few successful movies, but, you know, you now have got...
A real job.
You said it, not me.
Where I have to show up every week. Yeah.
But clearly that's not enough for you, because at the same time in 2011 you start the Gary Sinise Foundation. And I think as we were talking earlier, really in the last 8 years you were working, or those 8 years, last 8 years you've been working, only three of them is dedicated to film and TV. The rest is really dedicated to really what's become your life's passion, and that's the foundation. You know, and we heard earlier, you know, so Bobby and Jake and their wives, Emmy and Lisa, are just 2 of the 55 families that have benefited from one of your programs, Rise. Can you talk about the service work and why do you keep doing it?
Well, you know, again, there were all those seeds that were planted. Once I started going out for the USO and visiting our troops, and I would meet a lot of different people that were in the military support space, the nonprofit world, military charities. And I found myself at a certain point just wanting to do more all the time. And one of the ways that I could do that as a public figure is by lending my services to other military charities, doing events for them, raising money, playing concerts to raise money, PSAs, you name it. There were all these different things. I felt if I could help a lot of different military organizations, fundraisers, you know, raise more money, we could help more people, we could support more of our defenders, and that was a way that I could serve. So I started doing that regularly in '03 and just kept doing it, and then the television series came along, CSI New York. And I remember I was on that trip to Korea, that first one that I talked about, and I had just been offered CSI New York. And as an actor, you know, I was used to going from part to part. You kind of like the flexibility of playing one role, and then, you know, you shave your head and go play another part, and then you gain some weight and play this guy, and, you know, then whatever, change your voice. You know, play a lot of different characters. And I kind of was always used to doing that. So the idea of settling into playing one character week after week after week after week, I was mulling that over. I was trying to digest that figure out whether I should do it on that trip to Korea. When I got back, I met with the creator of CSI. I had a very good meeting with him. And my family was supporting the idea of me doing it. They liked the idea of me being home more. And so, I mean, for various reasons, I made the decision to go ahead and do CSI New York. And in the book, there's a chapter that I write about this called Perfect Timing. The timing of getting this television series could not have been better. I was ramping up all kinds of things that I was doing in support of our military and veterans and first responders, raising money, doing all these things. And along comes this television show. It's handed to me. And over the years, it kept going and kept going. And I participated in it financially. It was lucrative in that way. I had resources that I'd never had before. I was on television week after week. It wasn't, you know, the lack of knowledge on who Gary Sinise was, and it was just Lieutenant Dan, that started to go away because you're on television every week. And it was in 200 markets around the world. So it changed the career in a lot, but it also gave me resources that I'd never had before, and so I could do all kinds of wonderful things. So I started supporting all kinds of organizations in various ways, not only lending my services, but donating money and then raising money and all of that. And after doing that for several years, all the while shooting the television series and going out on the weekends and back to shoot the show during the week, having met extraordinary people in the military support nonprofit space, it just became clear that it was time to start my own military nonprofit. So this was a mission that had become a part of my life in a very important way, in an ongoing way, not something that I was going to stop doing. And I wanted an organization to be able to help me do more of it. So creating a nonprofit was the next step for me, and that's when I created the Gary Sinise Foundation in 2011. We're about eight and a half years in now, and we've got several great programs, including our home building program, our Soaring Valor program I mentioned. The Lieutenant Dan Band is a part of the Gary Sinise Foundation. I don't make a living playing this music. No, I make a living as an actor, but I have to pay the expenses of the band. I have to pay the band. I have to pay the production costs quite often. And so much like the USO, when you donate to the USO, you know that the USO is going to take your money and help send entertainment to the troops. When you donate to the Gary Sinise Foundation, that allows me to take the band to many different places. And as I've said, you know, over the years we played hundreds of concerts. We just did one at Little Creek in Norfolk for our special operators there, and we're just always out there doing something.
So, Gary, this has been an incredible conversation, not only about an incredible book, but the incredible example that you set for our fellow Americans. And so, unfortunately, the magic clock says that we're out of time, but we do have a tradition here at the George W. Bush Presidential Center, and that's to ask our guests, what final thoughts, what message, what call to action do you have for them and for anyone else?
When we were attacked on September 11th, those airplanes went into those buildings and all those horrific images. And the terrible feeling that we all had. President Bush, he made the Friday after the Tuesday a national day of prayer for the nation. And we were all heartbroken, right? You remember that feeling of fear and heartbreak, and my heart was broken for our country. I feared for my family, for my kids. What world are we growing up in? And so we went to our local church, And it was absolutely packed. Standing room, there was not a seat empty. And so I stood on the side, over on the side, and I remember our priest coming out, and I remember the first thing he said in his homily was, "This has been a tough week." And it was a tough week. But there was something else I heard during that service, and I'm not sure of what the words were or anything. But I was looking for something to heal this broken heart. And service was right in front of me. And in some ways, I just felt called to this work, to this mission of service. And that heart was broken. And so what I learned is that service is a great healer. And it helped me heal this broken heart. And it helped me help others heal their broken hearts by just going out there and showing up. And you don't have to be a famous movie star to show up. You know, you don't have to be a wealthy individual to show up. You just have to be a person who cares to show up. And I know what it did for me. And I would encourage anyone who has a broken heart, who is looking for some sense of purpose, to shine your light on somebody else, and it'll give your life great meaning and great purpose. I know it's done that for me, and I try to instill that in my kids so that they understand that there's a way to get out of yourself. It's by helping somebody else.
Gary.
Thank you, bud.
Gary, you started out talking about gratitude and appreciation. And I think today there are 450 people out here, as well as those watching on the live stream, who feel gratitude and appreciation for your example and your call to action to show up and to live a life of purpose through service. Gary Sinise.
Thank you, bud. Thank you, sir.
So we do want to thank Highland Capital. We want to thank all of you for coming out and sharing your Sunday afternoon with Gary and America's Heroes. We also want to encourage you to come back. Come back on May the 21st for our next Engage event. It is about the Secret Service. It's not often you get the opportunity here directly from America's Secret Service agents. We also need you to come back and check out our new exhibit, our latest exhibit here. It's on Away from the White House, Presidential Retreats. So please check that out when you have a chance. Thanks, everybody. Have a great afternoon.